Part 1, The Dawn of the Maya. Long before the cities rose, before the towering temples and the gods etched into limestone, there was only the forest. A living ocean of green, stretching from the lowlands of the Yucatan to the misty highlands of Guatemala. The jungle pulsed with sound, chirping insects, and the rhythm of rain that fell as though time itself were measured in drops. Somewhere in this vast wilderness, humanity began to carve meaning from the wild, and what would one day be called the Maya civilization stirred from its long dream of origins. At the dawn of this story, we are thousands of years before the arrival of kings, before the glyphs of stone recorded the deeds of rulers. Around 2000 BCE, small bands of farmers began to shape the land, sowing maize, beans, and squash, the trinity of life that sustained them. Theirs was a world in motion, where nature and spirit intertwined. Every seed planted was an act of faith, every harvest a dialogue with unseen powers. They watched the heavens with awe, tracing the movement of the stars, the rising of Venus, the journey of the sun across the sky. The Maya did not see time as linear, but as an endless cycle, a living rhythm repeating through eternity. In these early centuries, the people of the Maya lands began to settle near rivers and fertile valleys. They built small villages, huts of thatched roofs and clay walls, surrounded by crops and forest paths. The earth was generous, but also unforgiving. The rains could bring abundance or ruin. And so, out of necessity, a spiritual order emerged. The Maya world was divided between realms, the heavens above, the earth in between, and the underworld below. Life was not just lived, it was balanced. To keep the cosmos aligned, people made offerings to the gods who dwelled within every tree, every mountain, every drop of rain. The first gods were elemental, spirits of maize, rain, and the sky. To the Maya, maize was not merely food, it was creation itself. The sacred texts that would later be known as the Popol Vuh tell us that humanity was first formed from cornmeal and water. The gods tried to shape mankind from mud, then from wood, but both forms failed. Only when they mixed the sacred maize with divine breath did humans come alive. This story, whispered across millennia, was not simply myth, it was a mirror of existence. The Maya believed they were literally born from the earth they tilled, their flesh and spirit one with the soil. As generations passed, villages became communities. The people began to craft pottery, paint murals, and carve simple designs into stone. Over time, these expressions grew in complexity, reflecting a deepening sense of order and connection. A priestly class began to form, individuals who read the stars, interpreted dreams, and spoke with the divine. In their eyes, every eclipse, every drought, every sudden wind was a message. They built small platforms from earth and stone, places where rituals could be performed and offerings made to ensure balance between heaven and earth. These modest mounds were the seeds of something greater, the first step toward the pyramids that would one day pierce the jungle canopy. Around 1000 BCE, in the fertile valleys of what is now Guatemala and Belize, larger settlements began to emerge. The people here were no longer simply farmers, they were planners, artisans, astronomers. Villages expanded into proto-cities. Trade began to flow across the region, obsidian from the volcanic highlands, jade from distant rivers, shells from the coast, and salt from the northern plains. Each material carried not just value, but spiritual meaning. Jade was eternal breath, obsidian was night's reflection, and salt was purification. In the slow weaving of these exchanges, the Maya world began to unify, not as a single empire, but as a network of sacred relationships. The first monumental centers appeared at sites like Nakbi and El Mirador. Here, long before the rise of Tikal or Palenque, humans began to think in the language of eternity. They built platforms that stretched across acres, adorned with stairways leading upward into the sky. These were not mere structures, they were mountains made by human hands, each step an ascent toward the divine. The rulers who presided over these early centers were both kings and shamans, bridging the mortal and the sacred. Their duty was to maintain harmony in the cosmos, to ensure the rains came, the maize grew, and the stars continued their eternal dance. Imagine standing at dawn atop one of these first pyramids, the humid air thick with mist, as the sun rises over the canopy. The light falls across vast plazas, illuminating the altars below where priests burn copal incense. The smoke rises like prayers into the heavens, carrying the scent of pine and resin. Around the platform, villagers gather, men, women, and children, all watching the rituals unfold. Drums echo in the distance, conch shells sound from the temple steps, and dancers in feathered headdresses move in rhythm with the heartbeats of the gods. This was not spectacle. It was communion. Every gesture, every sound, every flame was part of the great cosmic order. As the centuries turned, the Maya grew in power and wisdom. Their understanding of the stars deepened into a science. They observed the precise cycles of the moon and planets, charted eclipses, and tracked the passage of time with astonishing accuracy. To them, time was alive, each day carrying its own spirit, each cycle holding its own destiny. They created calendars that intertwined the divine and the mundane, the sacred soak-in of 260 days and the solar hab of 365. When these cycles aligned, it marked moments of destiny, when the veil between worlds was thin. The priests, keepers of these calendars, became the guardians of balance. They dictated when to plant, when to harvest, when to make war or peace. And yet, their authority was not tyrannical, it was cosmic. The ruler was chosen not merely by birthright, but by alignment, born under auspicious signs, his existence a reflection of divine will. He was the axis of the world, the Keohol-Ajah, the Holy Lord through whom the gods spoke. The health of the people and the stability of the universe itself were thought to depend on his devotion. In the lowlands, life was dictated by the rhythm of water. The Yucatan lacked great rivers, so the Maya turned to the cenotes, natural sinkholes that opened into vast subterranean reservoirs. To them, these were not just sources of life, but portals to the underworld, the Xibalba. Offerings were cast into their depths, jade beads, ceramics, and sometimes, human lives. To descend into the cenote was to enter the sacred womb of the earth, to commune directly with the powers that sustained creation. The Maya lived in dialogue with these mysteries. Life and death were not opposites but continuations of the same sacred breath. Meanwhile, in the highlands, the Maya began to build with a sense of permanence. Stone replaced earth, temples rose higher, plazas widened, stelae were carved to honor the gods and the rulers who embodied them. The language of power became written, glyphs began to appear, intricate symbols representing sound, idea, and divinity. Each glyph was a world in itself, a blend of art and logic, history and myth. To read them was to hear the voices of the ancestors whispering across time. By 600 BCE, the early Maya civilization had taken form. Its people had mastered the art of agriculture, engineering, astronomy, and the sacred sciences. Their world was not a kingdom, but a constellation of cities, each shining with its own spirit. They were united not by conquest, but by shared belief, the understanding that the world was a living being, and humanity its consciousness. To live rightly was to keep balance, to forget was to invite collapse. As we stand at the threshold of this age, the jungle begins to hum with anticipation. The fires of the temples burn brighter, the gods demand more elaborate offerings, and the rulers begin to dream of eternity. The Maya have built the foundations of what will become one of the most astonishing civilizations in human history, one that will rise to rival Egypt, Rome, and Mesopotamia in complexity and grandeur. And yet, beneath the surface, the jungle waits. It listens, patient and eternal. For even as the first stones are laid, the forest knows that all empires return to dust. But that is a story for another night, as the stars turn silently over the land of the maize, and the first kings of the Maya awaken to greet the dawn of their world. Part 2, The Birth of the Sacred Cities. In the heart of the jungle, the sun rises like a blade of fire, slicing through the mist that clings to the treetops. The air hums with life, monkeys crying in the canopy, parrots streaking across the light, the distant echo of drums carried by the wind. It is the dawn of a new era, when the scattered villages of the Maya begin to transform into cities of stone and spirit. The jungle, once only a home, now becomes a cathedral. The earth is reshaped, molded into terraces and plazas, its contours reflecting the order of the heavens. This is the birth of the sacred cities, the age when humanity first began to build in the language of the gods. From small ceremonial centers, great cities emerge: Nakbi, El Mirador, San Bartolo, and Civil. Each rises from the jungle like a vision. They are not merely settlements, but living diagrams of the cosmos. Every building, every pathway, every stairway mirrors the movement of the sun and stars. The Maya do not build randomly, they build meaning. The land becomes a map of eternity. At the heart of each city stands a pyramid, reaching toward the sky. These temples are not tombs, nor fortresses, they are mountains made by human hands, sacred points where the heavens and the underworld converge. Upon their summits, priests offer maize and copal to the gods, their chants rising like smoke into the wind. The people gather below, their faces painted in red and black, their bodies adorned with jade and feathers. The smell of burning incense fills the air, mingling with the scent of rain and earth. The ceremony begins not as a spectacle, but as a cosmic act, a reaffirmation that humanity still remembers its place in the great circle of creation. The Maya world thrives on rhythm. The seasons flow like breath, planting, harvesting, celebrating, remembering. The Tzolk'in calendar governs every action. Each day is born with a spirit, a destiny. The priests, masters of time, read the patterns of the sky and decide when to act. They are the interpreters of the gods' will, the keepers of balance. To live is to move in harmony with the stars. The architecture of these early cities is astonishing. Great causeways, raised white roads called sakbiab, link temple to temple, city to city. They are arteries of light, reflecting the Milky Way above. The plazas are immense, built to host thousands during festivals that blend sound, color, and sacred fire. Beneath the stone, cisterns collect rainwater, channels guide it to fields, and the city itself breathes in rhythm with the land. But beyond the grandeur, there is a deeper beauty. The Maya do not separate the sacred from the practical. Their fields are temples, their homes are sanctuaries. Every act, cooking, weaving, planting, is a prayer. The gods are not distant rulers, they are companions in every heartbeat of existence. The forest is alive with their presence, the god of rain hidden in the clouds, the god of maize whispering in the stalks, the serpent god Kukulkan winding unseen through the wind. As these cities grow, so too does their power. By 500 BCE, the Maya world is a network of kingdoms, each ruled by divine kings who see themselves as mediators between gods and men. Their authority rests not on conquest but on cosmic duty. The ruler is the Ajah, the sacred lord, chosen by fate, crowned by prophecy. He performs bloodletting rituals to maintain the balance of creation, offering his own essence to feed the gods who gave life to humanity. His sacrifice ensures the fertility of the land, the victory in battle, the continuation of time itself. We can imagine a king standing atop a pyramid at sunset, holding a jade blade in his hand. The drums below echo like thunder as he pierces his flesh, letting his blood fall upon the sacred altar. The crowd watches in reverent silence. To them, this is not pain, it is communion. The blood is life, and life is the language through which the gods are nourished. In this exchange, the universe renews itself. The kings commission great monuments to mark their reigns. Stelae, tall slabs of limestone, are carved with intricate glyphs and images. They tell of births, wars, marriages, and divine encounters. Through these inscriptions, the Maya begin to record history, blending memory and myth. To read a stela is to see time unfold like a serpent, coiling through generations. The stone remembers what the jungle forgets. In the city of El Mirador, the scale of ambition becomes clear. Towering pyramids rise above the forest, their surfaces painted red and white, gleaming in the sunlight. At their base, immense plazas spread like seas of stone. The La Danta Pyramid, one of the largest ever built in the ancient world, dominates the skyline, a structure of almost 100 million bricks, raised by the hands of thousands. It is both a monument and a prayer, a declaration that humanity can shape eternity from the dust of the earth. And yet, even as cities rise, the jungle remains their equal. The Maya understand that they are not masters of nature but its stewards. Every construction, every ceremony acknowledges the delicate balance between order and chaos. The forest provides the materials for life, but it also holds the power to reclaim what man builds. The Maya do not fight the jungle, they live in its rhythm, breathing with it, listening to its pulse. As the centuries pass, the art of writing flourishes. The Maya script becomes one of the most complex systems ever devised, a fusion of logograms and syllabic signs. Each glyph carries layers of meaning, each carving an act of devotion. Scribes, trained from youth, learn to speak with the gods through ink and brush. They write on bark paper, pottery, and stone, recording prophecies, rituals, and histories. To write is to weave spirit into matter, to fix divine thought into the fabric of the world. Trade intensifies. Obsidian blades, cacao beans, jaguar pelts, and jade beads move along the Sakbiab. The cities begin to specialize, some as religious centers, others as trade hubs or seats of kingship. The Maya world hums with activity, an interconnected civilization built not by one empire but by shared purpose and sacred order. In these centuries, the Maya developed their astronomical genius. They track the cycles of Venus, a planet they call the morning star. To them, it is the herald of war and renewal. Its rising and setting are carefully charted, its appearances intertwined with the fate of kings and kingdoms. The observatories they build, circular towers aligned to celestial events, reflect their understanding that heaven and earth are mirrors of one another. Night after night, the priests climb to the tops of their temples to study the heavens. The stars are not distant, they are alive, each one a god moving through the fabric of time. To gaze at them is to glimpse eternity. The Maya know that their lives are brief, but through their rituals and records, they inscribe themselves into the eternal heartbeat of the cosmos. But even as the sacred cities rise, shadows begin to stir. Competition grows between the great centers, Tikal, Calakmul, Uaxactan. The rulers, once content to maintain balance, begin to crave dominance. Alliances form and fracture. The language of trade shifts to the language of conquest. Yet for now, the jungle still conceals the sound of war. The cities continue to glow like embers in the darkness, each one a universe unto itself. At night, the firelight flickers on the temple walls. The people gather to tell the stories of creation, of gods who descended into the underworld and rose again, of heroes who defeated death. These myths are not entertainment, they are memory. Through them, the Maya remember who they are, and why they exist. Every word, every rhythm of the tale carries the pulse of their ancestors. And so, as the stars turn over the land, the sacred cities continue to rise. The Maya world, vast and luminous, now stands at the threshold of greatness. The architects of time have awakened. The priests chart the heavens, the kings carve their names into eternity, and the people live beneath the shadow of pyramids that touch the very sky. The jungle breathes around them, watching, waiting. It has seen many civilizations rise and fall, and it knows the rhythm of all things. But for now, it is silent, listening to the heartbeat of the Maya, a people who believed that time was alive, that the world itself was sacred, and that to live in harmony with the cosmos was the highest act of devotion. As the dawn light spills over the temple stones and the city wakes to another day of ritual and labor, the gods look down from the heavens, content for now. The age of the sacred cities has begun, and in their shining plazas, humanity's dream of eternity takes form in stone and spirit alike. Part 3: The Architects of Time. The jungle hums in the stillness before dawn. 1,000 voices of unseen creatures echo through the mist, chirps, growls, distant howls, all blending into a living symphony. As the first light rises over the horizon, it glances off the limestone towers of Tikal, painting them gold. Smoke curls from the altars as the priests ascend the steps, their robes trailing like shadows. It is a morning like countless others, yet every sunrise in the Maya world carries the weight of eternity. Time itself is being measured, shaped, and woven into meaning by those who call themselves the keepers of the calendar, the architects of time. For the Maya, time is not a line. It does not rush forward toward an end. It circles, breathes, renews. The past and future coexist, folded together like the petals of a sacred flower. To understand time is to understand creation itself, and so the Maya devote their greatest intellect not to war, not to empire, but to the cosmos. They become the mathematicians of the infinite, the astronomers of destiny. Deep within temple observatories, the priests study the stars. They track the movements of Venus, Mars, and the Moon. They record each eclipse, each solstice, each alignment. The heavens are a vast text, and they learn to read it. Every pattern in the sky has meaning, every shift marks a turning in the divine rhythm. To the Maya, the cosmos is a conversation between gods and humankind, and their duty is to listen. Over centuries, they construct the long count, a calendar that stretches across millennia. It is not merely a way to mark days but a cosmic architecture, a way to understand the heartbeat of creation. According to this reckoning, time began not in myth but in measurable sequence, the birth of the current world recorded as 3114 BCE. For the Maya, this was not superstition but precision, the moment when gods shaped order from chaos, and humanity was called to take its place within the eternal cycle. They measure the solar year to an accuracy that rivals modern astronomy. They divide it into 18 months of 20 days, with 5 days left uncounted, the days of nothing, when the veil between worlds thins and the gods move freely among men. During these days, no work is done. Fires burn low. The people wait in reverent silence, knowing that the balance of the universe is fragile. The priests who maintain this cosmic order are not simply scholars. They are bridges between worlds. Their temples rise as observatories, their rituals as equations of divinity. At night, they light torches at the top of the pyramids and raise mirrors of obsidian to catch the light of Venus. They watch as it sinks below the horizon, marking not an end but a transformation. The cycles of the stars become the cycles of kings, of cities, of souls. Mathematics, to the Maya, is not a tool but a prayer. Their numerals are alive with meaning: 0, the sacred shell, representing both emptiness and potential, the dot and bar, simplicity embodying infinity. They calculate in base 20, their minds comfortable with vast scales, their sense of time stretching far beyond lifetimes. Through their glyphs, they encode the structure of existence itself. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving books, bears witness to their genius. Page after page, it reveals lunar tables, eclipse predictions, and the complex interplay of celestial cycles. These are not cold records, they are acts of devotion, drawn by hands that believed knowledge was sacred. To know was to honor creation, to measure time was to ensure the sun would rise again. In cities like Köpen and Palenque, this reverence for time finds physical form. Temples align perfectly with the movements of the sun. On specific days, shafts of light cut through narrow doorways to illuminate carved glyphs or statues of gods. Each alignment marks a moment of renewal, a cosmic dialogue captured in stone. The architecture itself becomes a clock, ticking not in seconds but in centuries. Within this grand design, the Maya kings see themselves as instruments of time. Their reigns are marked by cosmic anniversaries, their rituals synchronized with celestial events. When a new king ascends, it is not merely a political act, it is a cosmic renewal, a rebalancing of the universe. The king's bloodletting ritual is a reenactment of creation itself, his offering a spark that ensures time continues to turn. Imagine the scene: the ruler stands upon a high platform, the torches around him flickering in the wind. The drums below beat like the pulse of the earth. He takes a stingray spine and pierces his flesh, letting his blood drip onto bark paper. The priests burn it in sacred fire, and the smoke rises toward the stars. The people below chant his name, but he listens for another sound, the whisper of the gods, the hum of time itself acknowledging his sacrifice. These rituals are not born of cruelty but of connection. The Maya believe that their world exists only through balance, between sun and rain, life and death, heaven and underworld. Every ceremony, every drop of blood, every chant is a thread woven into the fabric of continuity. To neglect the ritual is to risk unraveling the world. The Maya see the universe as a great ceiba tree. Its roots reach into the underworld, its trunk stands in the mortal realm, and its branches stretch into the heavens. The gods dwell within it, moving between worlds along its spine. The cities themselves are built in its image, the central temples the trunk, the sacred wells the roots, the towers and stelae the branches. the people move through it as part of the tree's eternal growth. As generations pass, the priests refine their understanding of the stars. They chart the motion of Venus with astonishing accuracy, noting its 584-day cycle and linking it to war, renewal, and sacrifice. They synchronize the calendars of Earth and sky, the solar Hab, the ritual Tzolk'in, and the long count, so that every moment, every event, is placed precisely in the grand design. This precision gives the Maya a sense of destiny unlike any other civilization. They know that the world has ended before and will end again, not in destruction, but in transformation. Each cycle of creation is followed by renewal, each age a rehearsal for eternity. To live well is to live in alignment with that rhythm, to move with time rather than against it. As the centuries unfold, the cities expand. Palenque's palaces gleam with stucco reliefs depicting gods of the underworld and kings who became stars. Copan's stelae rise like forest trunks, each inscribed with glyphs recounting the turning of epochs. At Uaxacton, astronomers mark the solstices with stone structures aligned to the sun's path. The Maya do not merely watch the heavens, they bring the heavens to earth. In the plazas, festivals mark the passing of sacred dates. Dancers move in spirals, their steps tracing the orbits of planets. Musicians play rhythms that mimic the pulse of the stars. The people wear masks of gods and ancestors, merging themselves into the eternal play of existence. To the outsider, it may appear as celebration. To the Maya, it is remembrance, the reaffirmation that they live within a universe that breathes, sings, and dreams with them. And yet, beneath the splendor, a quiet tension begins to form. Time, for all its cycles, also bears weight. The cities grow immense, their populations swelling. Resources strain, rivalries simmer. Kings who once saw themselves as servants of the cosmos now begin to crave power for its own sake. The cosmic harmony that once bound the land begins to tremble under the ambitions of men. But for now, the priests still hold the rhythm. The kings still bleed for the gods. The people still rise with the dawn to work the maize fields, their lives woven into the pattern of creation. The stars still move above, their constellations burning like divine script across the black sky. Night descends again over the jungles of the Peton. A torch flickers atop a temple, casting shadows across the carvings of gods and kings. Somewhere below, a scribe dips his brush into black ink and begins to record the passing of the day, marking it in the long count, one more heartbeat in the eternal rhythm. The architects of time continue their work, patient and precise. They know that the world is fragile, but as long as they remember, as long as they measure and record, as long as they honor the cycles, the sun will rise again. And when it does, the Maya will look to the east and see not just a new day, but the rebirth of eternity. The jungle watches silently. Time moves in circles, and the story continues. Part 4, Kings of the Sky and Blood. In the dense jungles of the Peton Basin, where mist clings to the canopy like a ghostly memory and the cries of howler monkeys echo across the ancient world, the Maya began to reach the height of their civilization. The cities rose like emerald crowns above the green sea, grand, intricate, and alive with ritual, astronomy, and the heartbeat of divine kingship. This was not just a society of farmers and artisans. It was a living cosmos, built upon a sacred balance between heaven, earth, and the underworld. At the center of it all stood the Maya king, the Ajah, both ruler and God's reflection. His blood was not just his own, it was the lifeblood of the universe. When he bled, the gods listened. When he ruled, the heavens moved. The Maya saw him as the Axis Mundi, the world tree that connected mortal existence to the divine. Around him, cities blossomed into temples of light and shadow, where rituals unfolded like cosmic dramas written in stone. Among these sacred cities, Tikal reigned supreme, a metropolis of power and ambition that reached for the heavens. Its twin pyramids faced each other across a vast plaza, their stairways rising like stone rivers toward the stars. The rulers of Tikal were not merely men, they were celestial beings whose destiny was inscribed in glyphs and omens. One king's name would echo through the ages, Jasa Chan Kawil I, who restored Tikal to its glory after generations of decline. He raised the mighty Temple I, the temple of the great jaguar, a tomb and a symbol, a place where eternity met the sky. Far to the west, another city dared to challenge Tikal's supremacy, Calakmul, the Snake Kingdom. Its emblem glyph bore the serpent's head, a symbol of cunning and dominion. The rulers of Calakmul called themselves Kuhul Kanoloja, divine lords of the snake, and they forged alliances through bloodlines, war, and marriage, weaving an empire not of walls, but of loyalty and fear. Their rivalry with Tikal would last for centuries, a dance of war and diplomacy that shaped the political soul of the Maya world. This was the classic period, the age when Maya civilization reached its zenith, and its kings ruled not only by sword but by calendar and cosmos. The Maya understood time differently from any other people. They did not see it as a straight line, but as a sacred cycle, endless, repeating, divine. Their priests observed the movements of Venus, the phases of the moon, the solstices and equinoxes. Every battle, every coronation, every offering was performed at the precise moment when the heavens aligned. To them, time was alive, a god that demanded reverence. In the shadowed temples of Tikal, incense rose in spirals, curling through the air like whispers to the divine. Priests chanted beneath the flicker of torches, calling upon gods whose names were older than memory, Itsamna, Kukulkan, Chak, Nine Chel. They believed that through ritual bloodletting, they could open the portals between worlds. The king, with obsidian blade or stingray spine, would draw blood from his tongue or his genitals, offering it on strips of paper that burned, releasing his spirit to commune with the ancestors. Pain was transformation. Blood was creation. Every ceremony, every act of devotion, reaffirmed the king's link to the gods. The people watched in awe, believing that the success of their crops, the falling of rain, the turning of the stars, all depended upon this sacred exchange. The pyramids became stages where heaven and earth met. From their summits, rulers would stand at dawn, their headdresses gleaming with jade and feathers, watching as the sun rose directly between the twin temples, proof that the cosmos itself blessed their reign. Art and writing flourished alongside power. The Maya carved their histories into stone, hieroglyphs of kings, gods, and battles that still speak across millennia. Each glyph was a world of meaning, each stela a chapter in the story of time. Sculptors captured the serene faces of rulers, the curling smoke of incense, the curling serpents of divinity. Painted codices recorded the celestial cycles, the rituals, the mythic origins of creation itself. Knowledge was sacred, and those who mastered it, the scribes and astronomers, held a power as vast as any king. But the grandeur of the classic period was not only in its art or its temples. It was in the invisible web of politics and trade that connected the cities. Goods moved through jungle routes and river paths, obsidian from the highlands, jade from the Motagua Valley, cacao from the tropical lowlands, feathers from distant lands. Markets hummed with life, filled with merchants, artisans, and farmers. Behind the splendor, the Maya world pulsed with a rhythm of commerce and culture that stretched across hundreds of miles. In the midst of this brilliance, a new power emerged, Copan, in what is now Honduras. It became a beacon of learning and architecture, ruled by a dynasty whose founder claimed descent from Tikal's royal line. Its great plaza was a gallery of sculpted stelae, each more intricate than the last. One ruler, known as 18 Rabbit, adorned the city with monuments of divine grace, each carved in exquisite detail. His artistry marked the high point of Maya sculpture, and his fate, the fragility of Maya kingship. He was captured and sacrificed by a rival, his city left wounded, a reminder that even divine rulers were not immune to the turning of fate. Farther north, Palenque blossomed like a jewel in the Chiapas Mountains. Its most celebrated ruler, Kinich Janab Pakal, reigned for nearly 70 years, transforming Palenque into a city of cosmic architecture. His tomb, hidden deep within the Temple of the Inscriptions, would one day astonish archaeologists, a sarcophagus lid depicting his descent into the underworld and his resurrection as the maize god. To the Maya, kings did not die, they journeyed through the other world, reborn with the sun. Death, like time, was a cycle. As cities rose, so too did the burden of their ambition. The demands of building and ceremony strained the land. Wars consumed resources and lives. Droughts began to whisper through the jungles, faint, at first, but growing. The sacred balance began to tremble. The gods demanded more, and the kings answered with blood, temples, and endless devotion. The people followed, believing that the world must be fed, even as the rains faltered. Yet, in this moment, in the heart of the classic period, the Maya shone like the constellations they revered. Theirs was a civilization of astronomers and warriors, poets and mathematicians, dreamers who measured the infinite in stone. They built cities aligned with the stars, charted Venus with precision, and crafted art that still breathes. They spoke to the gods through geometry and ritual, and for centuries, the world listened. In the evenings, as torches flickered along temple walls and drums echoed through the plazas, the people looked to the sky. Above them, the Milky Way arched like a celestial serpent. They believed it was the path of souls, the river of the underworld that the sun must cross each night. And there, among the stars, they saw their ancestors, their gods, and their kings, shining eternally, guardians of the cosmic order. The Maya world, vast and interconnected, thrived on the delicate balance between power and piety. The rulers believed they could sustain this harmony forever. But beneath the grandeur, the first cracks had already begun to form, unseen, quiet, inevitable. The rain would not always come. The gods would not always answer. And the world that had been so carefully woven between heaven and earth would one day begin to unravel. For now, though, the jungles still sang. The fires still burned. The king still ruled beneath the gaze of the stars. In this golden twilight of the Maya, the past and the divine were one, and the world, for a moment, seemed eternal. Part 5, The Twilight of the Kings. The air above the jungles of the Maya lowlands grew still. The cries of parrots drifted through the dawn haze. The temples of Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, and Palenque still touched the sky, their limestone faces glowing golden in the rising sun, but something had changed. The silence between the drumbeats was longer. The rituals continued, but the gods no longer answered with rain. In this silence, an empire of spirit and stone began to tremble. For centuries, the Maya kings had reigned as mediators between heaven and earth. Their blood had nourished the gods, their temples had risen in harmony with the stars. But now the balance was slipping. The sacred calendar still turned, but the rhythm of the world faltered. What happens when a civilization built on divine cycles begins to fear that the gods have turned away? In the plazas of Tikal, incense still curled into the morning air. The priests still sang the hymns of the ancestors, their voices echoing across the vast courtyards. But the crops were failing. The maize grew thin and brittle. The rivers ran low. The people whispered that Chak, the god of rain, had turned his back. And still, the kings demanded offerings. In Copan, the lineage of divine kings had long shone bright, but after the capture and execution of King 18 Rabbit, its spirit dimmed. The monuments that once told stories of triumph now stood as reminders of mortality. The next rulers tried to rebuild, carving new stelae, raising new temples. But the soil was exhausted. The people were weary. The city that had once glowed with divine purpose began to fade into the jungle's embrace. Far to the west, in Palenque, the legacy of Pakal the Great lingered. His son and grandson continued his devotion, maintaining the temples, the rituals, the cosmic alignments. But Palenque too began to falter. The dynasties that had once seemed eternal began to fracture. Succession crises arose. Trade routes shifted. The vast network that had once tied the Maya world together, jade, obsidian, cacao, feathers, shells, began to unravel thread by thread. This was the beginning of what historians now call the classic Maya collapse. But for the Maya themselves, it was something far more profound, the unraveling of time. Imagine the night sky over the jungles of Petan around the year 800 CE. The stars burn as bright as ever, but the torches on the Great Pyramids flicker less often. The priests still climb the steps to greet the dawn, but their chants carry an edge of desperation. The old gods demand more blood, more devotion, more faith. And the people, hungry, frightened, and weary, give what they can. The kings double their efforts. Across the lowlands, monuments multiply. Each ruler, sensing the fragility of his power, carves his name into stone, one more offering to eternity. But these monuments, rather than symbols of strength, become whispers of fear. It is as though the Maya world is trying to write itself into permanence before the jungle claims it back. Wars grow frequent and cruel. Cities that once traded now raid each other for captives and tribute. The rivalries between Tikal and Calakmul, once defined by strategy and ceremony, descend into chaos. Great cities, Dos Pilas, Aguatica, Karakol, burn in the night. Refugees flee into the forests, abandoning the plazas that once rang with festivals. And yet, even amid ruin, the Maya spirit endures. They do not stop believing in the sacred order, they fight to preserve it. The kings bleed more, pray more, command more temples to be built. Each stone lifted to the sky is a plea, keep the heavens in motion, keep the world alive. But the rain does not come. The droughts lengthen. The maize dies in the fields. There are signs, carved into the very stones, of despair turned to determination. Glyphs describe ceremonies of renewal, attempts to rekindle cosmic balance. One temple after another is aligned with Venus, with the Pleiades, with the solstices, as though the Maya were reweaving the cosmos itself. The priests seek patterns in the stars, searching for the moment the gods will forgive. But the silence of the skies grows louder. It was not a single catastrophe that ended the classic Maya world. It was a long, slow unraveling, a fading of the light that once filled their temples. Droughts came in cycles. The forests were stripped to make lime for plaster, leaving the soil weak. The rivers shifted their courses. The trade routes faltered. The peasants, who had built the monuments and farmed the terraces, could no longer sustain the demands of their divine kings. The very system that had once made the Maya great now turned against them. The kings, blind to their own limits, continued their rituals as cities emptied. In some places, like Tikal, the final rulers stood alone atop their pyramids, performing the old rites before empty plazas. Their voices echoed against the stone, a prayer to gods who no longer answered. By the year 900, the great cities of the southern lowlands were ghosts. The plazas were silent, their stele half buried in vines. The temples cracked and crumbled. Jungle trees grew through the palaces, roots splitting the carved faces of kings. Parrots nested in the chambers where priests had once burned incense. The world that had been alive with ceremony and sound had fallen into a green, eternal sleep. But this was not the end of the Maya, only the end of their classical age. In the north, in the limestone plains of the Yucatan, new cities began to rise, cities like Uxmal, Mayapan, and above all, Chichén Itzá. Here, the Maya spirit was reborn, tempered by centuries of struggle, transformed by contact with new cultures, new gods, new ambitions. In Chichén Itzá, something new stirred in the jungle. The old glyph spoke of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, a god of creation and wisdom, a divine wind that connected the earth and the heavens. His image bore a striking resemblance to the Quetzalcoatl of central Mexico. The two civilizations, long separated by forest and time, now seemed to touch. Traders and travelers carried not only goods but ideas, art, architecture, and faith. The new Maya of Chichén Itzá built in a style unlike anything before. Their temples soared high and symmetrical, lined with colonnades and serpent carvings. The Great Pyramid of Kukulkan, El Castillo, was a cosmic calendar in stone. On the equinox, sunlight descended its steps in the form of a serpent's shadow, connecting heaven to earth. To stand there, at that moment, was to witness the Maya's undying devotion to order, to time, to beauty. But beneath this new splendor, echoes of the old world remained. The ball courts grew larger and bloodier. The rituals more extravagant. Warriors marched in feathered armor, adorned with jaguar skins. Sacrifice continued, but now with a new tone, less of devotion, more of spectacle. The Maya of the north had inherited both the brilliance and the burdens of their ancestors. Trade flourished once again. Cacao, salt, obsidian, jade, and feathers flowed through the peninsula. Chichén Itzá became a city of power and commerce, its influence stretching far beyond the Yucatan. But even here, the gods were fickle. Power invited envy. In time, even this new empire began to fracture. By the 1200s, Chichén Itzá's influence waned. The Maya did not vanish. They changed. They moved northward and eastward, building new towns, new kingdoms. They adapted to the forests, the hills, the coasts. The heart of their civilization still beat beneath the canopy. The languages of the Maya, Kich, Yucatec, Tzotzil, and more, endured, spoken by millions to this very day. Their calendar continued to turn, their stories continued to live. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they found not ruins, but living cities, Itzá, Tayasal, Nochpatan. The Maya were still there, still worshipping, still building, still remembering. They carried the memory of their ancestors not in books, but in blood. The fall of the southern cities was not death, it was transformation. The Maya world had simply changed its skin. The forest reclaimed the stones, but the spirit of the people remained. Imagine now the moonlight on the temples of Tikal. The trees sway gently. The cries of the night creatures echo through the ruins. And there, beneath the vines, the carvings still whisper the stories of kings and gods. The jungle is not their tomb. It is their guardian. The Maya never truly fell. Their empire may have dissolved into the mists of time, but their descendants remain, their languages alive, their traditions strong, their gods still walking between worlds. The rain still falls on their sacred lands, and the stars still move in the heavens above, tracing the same patterns their astronomers once charted with awe and precision. The story of the Maya is not one of destruction, but of endurance, a civilization so deeply intertwined with the cosmos that even time itself could not erase it. The jungle sleeps, but beneath its green silence, the world of the Maya still breathes. Part 6, The Serpent and the Sun. The jungle does not forget. It merely listens, patiently, quietly, waiting for time to circle back upon itself. And as centuries passed since the great cities of the south had fallen into silence, something began to stir again among the limestone plains of the Yucatan. The air was heavy with heat and the scent of copal resin. Cicadas screamed in the midday sun. The people of the north still remembered the old stories, of Tikal, of Calakmul, of Palenque, though now those names were like prayers whispered into wind. They spoke instead of new gods, new rulers, new hopes. They turned their eyes toward a horizon that shimmered with a new light, the dawn of Chichén Itzá. Here, in a land where the earth was thin and the cenotes ran deep, the Maya rebuilt. The stones of the old world found new form. Temples rose again, carved with serpents whose bodies twisted along the stairways, their heads poised to swallow the sun. The feathered serpent, Kukulkan, had descended upon the Maya. Kukulkan was not merely a god, he was a promise. A wind that connects heaven and earth. A force that carries knowledge, renewal, and transformation. The people said he had come from across the sea, bringing with him the wisdom of the stars. Others whispered that he was the return of a god long forgotten, a mirror of the ancient Lord Quetzalcoatl worshipped by the Toltecs to the west. Whatever his origin, Kukulkan's symbol, the serpent with feathers of the Quetzal, became the heartbeat of a new Maya age. The kings of Chichén Itzá claimed to rule by his will. They built a city unlike any other, not sprawling like Tikal or hidden like Palenque, but open, monumental, geometric. It was both a capital and a calendar, a living stone clock that marked the breath of time itself. At the city's heart stood El Castillo, the pyramid of Kukulkan. Its 4 stairways pointed to the cardinal directions, each with 91 steps, together, 364. Add the top platform, and the total became 365, the sacred number of the solar year. At dawn and dusk on the spring and autumn equinoxes, the sun cast shadows upon the pyramid's north face. As the light moved, a serpent of shadow appeared to slither down the staircase, joining with the carved serpent head at its base. To stand there, in that moment, was to witness eternity. The heavens speaking to the earth through stone and light. The people would gather in thousands, their faces turned upward, their voices hushed. The priests would chant the hymns of Kukulkan, and the rulers would step forward in feathered headdresses, shimmering with jade and gold. In the dance of sunlight and shadow, they would see proof that the cosmos still moved, that the gods still watched. But beneath this divine order, the politics of Chichén Itzá were anything but peaceful. Power, as always, demanded blood. The rulers of Chichén were not like the divine kings of the southern lowlands. They were warriors, organized, pragmatic, shrewd. They ruled through strength, trade, and spectacle. The ball courts grew immense, their walls lined with carvings of decapitated players, reminders that the game was both sport and sacrifice. It was said that the winners of the sacred game were offered to the gods, their blood feeding the sun. To die upon that court was not defeat, it was transcendence. The Maya believed that life and death were not opposites but twins, two faces of the same eternal cycle. Beyond the temples, Chichén Itzá thrived as a commercial power. Traders known as Paktika journeyed across land and sea, carrying cacao, cotton, salt, jade, obsidian, and shells. Canoes glided through coastal waters, linking the peninsula with faraway lands. The Maya world had once again become a network of light, not of kings and divine descent, but of trade, exchange, and shared faith. Yet the gods of Chichén Itzá demanded more than offerings of goods. In the sacred cenotes, the great sinkholes that pierced the limestone crust, priests cast sacrifices into the deep. Gold, jade, obsidian blades, and human bodies vanished into the water, offered to Chak, the rain god, and to the spirits that lived below. The cenotes were believed to be portals to Xibalba, the underworld, a mirror realm beneath the earth, where the souls of the dead journeyed and the gods of night held court. On some nights, when the moon hung full over the jungle, the priests said they could hear whispers rising from those waters, the murmurs of the ancestors, the sighs of the gods. The city of Chichén Itzá grew vast. The temples gleamed with paint, red, blue, yellow, white. Drums thundered across the plazas. The scent of burning copal filled the air. The people rejoiced in the splendor of their new world. But beyond the walls, shadows gathered. Rival powers emerged. To the west, Uxmal, with its grand pyramid of the magician, rose to prominence. Its rulers, known as the Lords of the Hills, traced their lineage to divine ancestors and claimed to hold secrets as old as the stars. To the east, other cities vied for influence, Mayapan, Koba, Ek Balam. The Yucatan became a tapestry of alliances and betrayals, each kingdom watching the other, waiting for weakness. The rulers of Chichén Itzá built alliances through marriage and blood. They sent emissaries, gifts, and promises. They hosted grand rituals to display their might, processions that filled the plazas with dancers, warriors, and priests. But ambition, like fire, cannot be contained for long. Some say that Chichén Itzá fell not to invasion but to its own pride. The wealth that once strengthened it became poison. The nobles grew decadent, the warriors restless, the commoners weary. The rain began to fail again. Drought spread across the peninsula. The cenotes grew dark and silent. The gods demanded sacrifice, but even that could not bring back the water. And so began the rise of Mayapan. Mayapan's rulers claimed to be the true heirs of Kukulkan. They built their city in imitation of Chichén Itzá, smaller, but still magnificent. They revived the rituals, the ceremonies, the sacrifices. But they also built something new, a confederation of cities united under one banner. For a time, peace returned to the land. Trade resumed, the roads thrummed with travelers, and the old gods were honored once more. Yet, beneath the surface, the serpent of ambition slithered still. Mayapan's alliances were fragile, held together by fear and faith. When the ruling family, the Kakam, grew too powerful, rivals rose against them. Blood was spilled in the streets. The confederation dissolved into chaos. By the 1400s, the Maya world was once again fragmented, dozens of small kingdoms, each clinging to its own piece of the divine legacy. Yet even in this fracturing, something remarkable endured. The Maya never lost their identity. Their king still wore jade. Their priests still read the stars. Their builders still raised temples to align with the sun and the moon. The feathered serpent never truly left them. The mythology of Kukulkan endured not just as religion but as philosophy, the belief that creation itself is a cycle of descent and ascent. The serpent sheds its skin, just as the world must shed its past to be reborn. Every drought, every fall, every death, was merely another shedding. The gods were not gone, they were simply waiting for the next dawn. And the Maya understood this truth better than anyone. They had watched their world burn, rebuild, and burn again. They had watched the forests swallow their cities and the stars continue to turn above the canopy. They had seen kings rise and vanish, and still, they endured. Their stories became songs, their songs became whispers, their whispers became prayers carried on the wind. Centuries later, when the Spaniards came, armored men with swords that flashed like lightning and faith that burned like fire, they found a people who still spoke to their gods in the language of stone and sky. The Maya greeted them not as strangers, but as part of a cycle foretold. Some believed the bearded newcomers were the return of Kukulkan himself, the feathered serpent come again to bring a new age. But soon, the truth revealed itself. The serpent that descended this time brought conquest, not renewal. The old gods were silenced by crosses, their temples desecrated, their idols smashed. The smoke that once rose from sacred fires now rose from burning codices, books that held the knowledge of centuries turned to ash. Yet even then, the Maya spirit did not die. In secret caves, in remote villages, they continued their rituals. They whispered the names of the old gods under their breath. They carved the signs of the calendar on hidden walls. The Spanish could destroy the temples, but not the sky, and as long as the stars shone above them, the Maya remembered. The feathered serpent had merely coiled into sleep. Generations passed. The jungles grew thick again over the ruins. The cities that had once ruled the world of maize and time lay buried under roots and silence. But beneath that silence, the heartbeat remained, steady, eternal. Archaeologists would one day uncover the stones. Explorers would stand in awe beneath El Castillo and watch the serpent of shadow descend its steps at equinox. Tourists would marvel, scholars would debate, and the world would once again whisper the names of the Maya. But to the descendants of those who built it, these were never ruins, they were memories. Living, breathing echoes of who they are. The serpent and the sun continue their eternal dance. Each dawn that breaks over the jungles of Yucatan is another whisper of that old promise, that nothing truly ends, only changes form. The Maya believed that even the universe would one day collapse and be reborn, like a serpent shedding its skin. And perhaps, in that endless cycle, they saw a truth that the rest of the world still struggles to grasp. The temples of Chichén Itzá may crumble, but the idea they embodied, the unity of heaven, earth, and time, is immortal. The feathered serpent still moves in shadow and light, in myth and in memory, reminding the world that the story of the Maya was never about conquest, but about continuity. And so, as the stars glide once more across the tropical night sky, the jungle breathes. The stones glisten with dew. The whisper of Kukulkan returns on the wind, soft, eternal, unbroken. Part 7, The Arrival of the Cross and the Fire. The morning sun rose red over the Caribbean Sea, its reflection rippling across the turquoise water like a spill of molten copper. On the horizon, dark shapes approached, not canoes carved from ceiba trees, but vast wooden beasts, their bellies full of wind and fire. The people of the coast stared in silence as the ships crept closer, their sails glowing in the dawn light. Some said they were floating temples. Others said they were omens, the gods returning from across the eastern sea. In the year the Maya counted as 11 Ahau, the world began to change. The strangers came in armor that gleamed like sunlit obsidian. They carried thunder in their hands and banners marked with the symbol of the cross. They spoke words that rolled harshly off the tongue, words the wind could barely carry. Behind them marched men with spears, muskets, and horses, beasts the Maya had never seen before, their breath hot and steaming in the humid air. The first encounter was not war. It was wonder. The Maya, who had measured the heavens for millennia, gazed upon these newcomers as if trying to place them in the cosmic order. Were they gods? Messengers? The return of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, come again to teach the cycle of time? For a brief moment, peace hovered like a fragile leaf. Gifts were exchanged, gold trinkets for glass beads, fruit for iron. The Spaniards smiled, nodded, and prayed to their god beneath the same sun that had once watched over the temples of Chichén Itzá. But beneath those smiles burned a hunger that had carried them across oceans. They had come not for trade, nor for friendship, but for souls, for gold, and for empire. The cross came before the sword. Priests raised it high in the villages, preaching of a single God, of sin and salvation. The Maya listened, puzzled. A single God? To them, the universe was a web, countless deities bound by cycles of life and death. The idea of one God ruling over all was as strange as saying the sky could exist without stars. When persuasion failed, fire followed. Temples were torn down, idols smashed, codices burned. Ancient books that contained the knowledge of the heavens, written in hieroglyphs the priests themselves could not yet read, turned to ash beneath the tropical rain. The flames consumed centuries of science, poetry, and prayer. The Maya watched, silent, as their memories were devoured by fire. Still, they did not break. In the jungles of Petén, in the highlands of Guatemala, the Maya retreated into the shadows of their ancestors. They carried their gods with them, hidden, whispered, disguised behind the faces of saints. The Virgin became the mother of maize. Christ became the Lord of renewal. Even as the friars built churches atop the foundations of temples, the Maya found ways to weave their old faith into the new. Yet the Spaniards were relentless. When Hernán Cortés marched westward to conquer the Aztec Empire, he sent scouts and missionaries into the Yucatán. Reports returned of kingdoms that still resisted conversion, cities hidden in the forests, ruled by kings who spoke to the gods of rain and sun. And so, the conquest of the Maya began, not in one battle, but in hundreds, spread across centuries. The Maya world was not an empire. It was a mosaic, dozens of city-states, each independent, each proud. This made them resilient, but it also made them vulnerable. While one city resisted, another might ally with the Spaniards. Some saw opportunity in the foreign weapons and power. Others saw only the end of the world. By the 1540s, the Spaniards had subdued much of the Yucatán. The great cities were plundered, their stones repurposed into cathedrals and fortresses. The people were forced into labor under the encomienda system, working the fields for foreign masters. The language of the priests replaced the hieroglyphs of the scribes. The gods of maize and thunder were renamed as demons. But in the deep jungles, resistance endured. The Itzá people, descendants of the once mighty lords of Chichén Itzá, held out in their island capital, Tikal, on the blue waters of Lake Chichén Itzá. They watched as the world around them fell, one kingdom after another. Yet for nearly 2 centuries, they remained unconquered, the last flame of the old Maya world. Spanish travelers who passed near Tikal spoke of it with awe. They said the city shone white in the sunlight, its temples rising above the water like ghosts of an older age. The Itzá king, Ken Ek, welcomed strangers with dignity but refused to abandon the old gods. When missionaries came, he listened politely, then sent them away with gifts and warnings. The Itzá have their own path. The gods will decide when the time has come. The time, it seemed, never came. Until 1697. That year, a Spanish force under Martín de Ursúa marched through the jungle, dragging cannons through mud and heat. They reached the shores of Lake Chichén Itzá, built rafts, and crossed the water to Tikal. For the first time in over 2,000 years of recorded Maya history, there were no more free cities. The last king of the Itzá fell beneath the thunder of muskets. The conquest was complete. The long night had begun. The cross stood now where once the serpent had glided. The smoke of incense had been replaced by the smoke of muskets and the bells of churches. But even in this new age of darkness, the ancient rhythm endured, beneath the surface, like a heartbeat underwater. In small villages, the people still marked the days by the moon. They still planted maize according to the old cycles. The calendar, though banned, survived, carved into doorframes, woven into textiles, whispered in markets. When the priests asked if they still followed the old gods, they would smile and say, "No, Father. We follow yours. But at night, in secret, the fires burned again. Centuries later, explorers from Europe and America began to hear rumors of lost cities, covered in vines, swallowed by jungle. Men like John Lloyd Stephens and Frederick Catherwood would cut their way through the foliage and stand before towering ruins, Copan, Palenque, Uxmal, Tikal. They saw temples rising from the forest like mountains of stone. They saw faces carved into the walls, staring out with calm defiance. To them, it was discovery. To the Maya, it was remembrance. Because the people who lived among those ruins never truly forgot. They still told stories of the builders, the ancestors who had shaped the world in stone and measured time in stars. When the outsiders came with notebooks and cameras, the villagers watched quietly. Some smiled, some prayed, some turned away. Because they knew, these ruins were not dead. They were sleeping. The great irony of conquest is that it never truly conquers what it cannot understand. The Spaniards had taken gold, temples, and books. But the Maya had built something indestructible, a civilization of ideas. The belief that time was eternal. That creation itself was a cycle. That life, death, and rebirth were all part of one unbroken breath of the cosmos. Those ideas endured through the centuries, hidden in festivals, in weavings, in lullabies sung to children by firelight. Even today, the Maya people live across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, millions strong. They speak their languages, plant their maize, and honor the old cycles beneath the same stars their ancestors once charted. And so, the story did not end in conquest. It transformed, as it always had. If you were to stand tonight in the ruins of Tikal, under the open sky, you would see Orion rising, the same constellation the Maya once saw as a cosmic hearth. The wind would move through the ceiba trees, carrying the scent of the forest and the whisper of voices long gone. Listen closely, and you might hear it, the faint echo of drums, the rustle of feathers, the murmur of prayers. The Maya did not vanish. They became the silence between the stars. The fire that burned their temples also lit the path to memory. The cross that conquered them now stands beside their ancient gods, sharing space in a world that refused to die. And in that coexistence, in that impossible harmony between past and present, lies the true legacy of the Maya. The feathered serpent, the maize god, the lords of Xibalba, all still live, not in temples or tombs, but in the hearts of those who remember. And as the sun rises once more over the jungle, gilding the stone faces of the old kings, the world continues its slow, eternal turn, another day in the endless cycle. The serpent moves again. Part 8. The rediscovery of the lost cities. The jungle sleeps, but not in silence. It breathes, a slow, humid rhythm, the same that once surrounded the kings and priests of the Maya world. Birds cry in the canopy, frogs chant beneath the roots, and vines twist around the bones of temples swallowed by centuries. For nearly 1,000 years, the forest kept its secret. Beneath the endless green, stone cities waited, patient as gods. Time, it seemed, had forgotten them. But time, to the Maya, was never a straight path. It was a circle. And all circles return. In the early 19th century, far across the sea, a new age of curiosity had begun. Europe hungered for mysteries, for lost civilizations, for stories of vanished worlds. The jungles of the New World, barely mapped and barely understood, became a stage for explorers and dreamers. And it was in this age of rediscovery that the Maya began to awaken once more, not through prophecy or war, but through ink, paper, and light. The first whispers came from travelers and traders who passed through the Yucatan. They spoke of strange ruins deep in the forest, of pyramids covered in moss, of walls carved with faces and glyphs no one could read. Some dismissed the stories as myths, jungle hallucinations brought on by fever and heat. But a few listened. Among them was John Lloyd Stephens, an American diplomat and adventurer, a man of restless mind and quiet obsession. Stephens had read of the lost cities of the Maya, and something in him refused to leave the mystery alone. In 1839, he set sail from New York with an artist, Frederick Catherwood, whose talent for architectural precision bordered on the miraculous. Together, they carried little more than sketchbooks, notebooks, and determination. What they would find would change the world's understanding of the Americas forever. When they reached the coast of Honduras, the air was thick with rain and insects. They hired guides who spoke of a place called Copan, hidden in the jungle. The journey took days, hacking through vines, crossing rivers, sleeping on damp ground. And then, one morning, the forest opened, and Stevens found himself standing before a wall of stone. Figures stared back at him, tall, solemn, ancient. They were not the crude idols he expected, but kings carved with grace and intelligence. Catherwood knelt in the mud and began to draw. Line by line, the city of Copan re-emerged, temples, stelae, hieroglyphs. The faces seemed alive, their eyes filled with thought. Stevens wrote later, "It was not a place of savages, but of a people advanced in art and design. We stood before the ruins of an unknown civilization." From Honduras, they traveled north, to Palenque, to Uxmal, to Caba, and beyond. Each site revealed another piece of a vast forgotten world. Catherwood's illustrations captured every detail: serpents coiled in stone, stairways leading to the sky, columns etched with stories no one could yet read. When they published their discoveries in Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas, and Yucatan, the book caused a sensation. Readers in Europe and America were stunned. Until that moment, the dominant belief had been that the Americas had no ancient civilization comparable to Egypt or Greece. But here it was, a culture of astronomers, architects, and philosophers who had built cities in the rainforest long before Rome rose. The Maya had returned to the world's imagination. But imagination is a strange form of conquest. As the explorers celebrated their rediscovery, the descendants of the Maya still lived nearby, farmers, weavers, and villagers who had never forgotten the ruins. To them, these were not lost cities. They were places of memory, alive with spirits. When the foreigners arrived, digging and measuring, the locals watched in silence. Some helped guide them. Others warned them not to disturb the stones. "They are alive," they said. "They remember." By the mid-19th century, the ruins of the Maya world had become a fascination for scholars, artists, and even poets. Expeditions followed: Desire Charnay, Teobert Mailer, Alfred Maudslay, each pushing deeper into the jungle, each uncovering more of what time had hidden. Maudslay, a quiet Englishman, brought something new: photography. He captured the ruins in haunting sepia tones, their stone faces half-lit by sunlight streaming through the trees. Through his lens, the world could finally see the Maya, not as myth, but as reality. In Europe, museums began collecting artifacts. Sculptures and stelae were shipped across the ocean to be displayed in halls of marble, far from the humidity of their birthplace. To many, it was preservation. To others, it was theft, the continuation of a long history of taking what was sacred and making it property. Yet even as these stones were moved, their meaning remained elusive. The hieroglyphs that covered every wall were unlike any other writing known. Scholars guessed wildly. Some thought they were symbolic, others that they represented pure numbers or decoration. The true voices of the Maya were silent, locked inside their own language. Decades turned to centuries before that silence was broken. In the early 20th century, archaeologists like Sylvanus Morley and J. Eric Thompson devoted their lives to studying the Maya script. Thompson believed the glyphs were purely religious, mystical symbols with no grammatical structure. His view dominated for years. But then, in the 1950s and 60s, a new generation began to challenge it. Among them was a young Russian linguist, Yuri Norizov, who made a bold claim: the Maya glyphs were not abstract, they were phonetic. They represented sounds, like an alphabet mixed with pictures. Many dismissed him at first, but slowly, his ideas proved true. With his breakthrough, the words of the Maya began to speak again after a silence of 1,000 years. By the late 20th century, epigraphers could read the names of kings, the dates of battles, the prayers of priests. Suddenly, the monuments became more than art, they were history, alive with human voices. We learned of dynasties, of rivalries, of astronomers who tracked Venus with astonishing precision. we discovered that the Maya had not vanished but evolved, surviving through collapse, conquest, and time. But rediscovery is never just about stones. It is about recognition. The Maya people, who had endured centuries of marginalization, began to see their ancestors honored once more. Their languages were taught in schools. Festivals revived ancient traditions. The calendar that once defined their universe was no longer forbidden. In the same places where fire once burned their codices, now scholars came to study their meaning. Tourists arrived too, waves of them. Planes landed near Cancun, buses drove to Chichén Itzá, cameras clicked in front of temples once hidden by vines. The old cities became World Heritage Sites, cleaned and curated. At night, light shows played across the pyramids. Some said it was beautiful, others said it was hollow, that the ruins were being turned into spectacle, stripped of silence. Still, the Maya watched. They had seen empires come and go. A few centuries of tourism were nothing in the long rhythm of time. At dawn, in Tikal, the forest still swallows sound. Mist rises from the trees, drifting between temples that pierce the canopy. Birds circle the ancient plazas. In the distance, a single conch shell blows, a faint echo from a modern Maya ceremony welcoming the sun. The past and present overlap. The rediscovery of the Maya was never just the story of explorers and archaeologists. It was the world remembering something it had forgotten about itself, that civilization is not the sole inheritance of one continent or one people. That knowledge can be lost, and yet, patiently, be found again. And so, beneath the stars that the Maya once counted, the story continues. Their ruins are not relics, they are mirrors, reflecting the persistence of human wonder, the hunger to know who we were, and what we might still become. The explorers thought they had rediscovered a lost civilization. But in truth, they had rediscovered a lost connection, between people and the infinite circle of time. And if you walk among those stones today, beneath the slow dance of light and leaves, you may feel it, the pulse of something vast, ancient, and unbroken. The earth remembering its own name. Part 9, The Voice of Time, Decoding the Maya Script. The jungle listens. Always. Even when the world forgets, the stones remember. They hold their breath beneath the weight of centuries, waiting for someone who can understand. For the Maya, words were not merely tools of speech, they were the very breath of creation. To name something was to summon its soul. To write it was to make it eternal. And yet, for almost 1,000 years, those voices slept. The great glyphs that once lined the temples of Copan, Palenque, and Tikal were silenced by conquest and time. The knowledge of how to read them, how to give them life, had vanished. When Spanish friars burned the codices in the 16th century, they didn't just destroy books. They destroyed a language that connected an entire civilization to the cosmos. The Maya script, with its curling symbols and intricate faces, became an enigma. Scholars in the 19th and early 20th centuries stared at the stones, tracing their forms, measuring every curve and line, but understanding none of it. Some believed the glyphs were purely decorative. Others insisted they were mystical, expressions of gods, not people. The truth was hidden in plain sight, carved into the walls, waiting for someone to listen. It would take centuries for the silence to break, and when it did, it began not in the jungles of the Yucatan, but in the frozen libraries of post-war Europe. In the 1950s, a young Russian linguist named Yuri Norizov stumbled across a facsimile of the Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Maya books. He was fascinated by its patterns, strange combinations of pictures and symbols arranged with mathematical precision. Most scholars dismissed the codices as unsolvable. But Norizov saw something different. He believed that the glyphs were not just pictures, but sounds. Each one represented a syllable, a phonetic system, like a blend between alphabet and art. It was a daring idea, one that challenged decades of academic certainty. In a quiet apartment in Moscow, surrounded by stacks of notes and cigarette smoke, Norizov began to decode the lost tongue. He cross-referenced the glyphs with colonial-era Maya texts written in Latin letters. Slowly, patterns emerged. Words took shape. When he published his findings, the world of Mayan studies erupted. Many dismissed him. How could a man who had never set foot in Central America claim to solve its greatest mystery? But Knorozov's logic was unshakable. Over time, others tested his method, and the truth became clear: he was right. The ancient Maya could speak again. What began as a whisper in Moscow soon became a chorus across the world. In the 1970s and 80s, a new generation of epigraphers carried Knorozov's torch. Among them was Linda Skeel, an artist who fell in love with the glyphs and devoted her life to their meaning. She gathered scholars, linguists, and Maya descendants in workshops deep in the jungles of Mexico. Together, they reassembled the broken language, glyph by glyph, story by story. Every time a glyph was deciphered, a person's name returned from oblivion. A king, a queen, a priest, once thought to be myth, now revealed as real. At Palenque, they learned of King Pakal the Great, whose tomb lay beneath a pyramid of stone. His sarcophagus lid, once mysterious, was now readable, a story of death and rebirth, of a king ascending through the cosmic tree into the stars. At Copan, they found the names of sculptors and scribes who had carved their own signatures into stone. Not gods, not legends, artists. Human beings who had wanted to be remembered. The Maya were no longer silent symbols. They were poets and scientists, engineers and astronomers, their voices finally returning through the patient work of hands across time. But what was perhaps most astonishing was not what the glyph said, but how they said it. The Maya language was an art form, recursive, metaphorical, rich with double meaning. A single glyph could carry a story within a story. Their words flowed like rivers, spiraling back upon themselves, echoing the cycles of their calendar and the rhythm of the cosmos. To read a Maya inscription is to enter a world where time is not linear, but alive, breathing, looping, turning endlessly upon itself. And through this understanding came a revelation: the Maya were not obsessed with the end of time, as so many modern interpretations would later claim. They were fascinated with its continuity. To them, creation and destruction were partners, two halves of the same eternal dance. Every age that ended gave birth to another. Their calendar, which Western minds misunderstood as prophecy of apocalypse, was in truth a statement of renewal. The world does not end, it transforms. In a sense, this rediscovery mirrored the very story of the Maya themselves. Their language, once silenced, was now reborn. Their cities, once forgotten, were remembered. Their people, once marginalized, began to reclaim their place in history, not as relics, but as living descendants of genius. Across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, Maya communities began teaching their ancestral languages again. Young students learned to write in the same script their ancestors carved into temples. Scholars worked hand in hand with local elders to preserve oral traditions and reinterpret ancient texts. At night, under the same constellations that their ancestors charted, new storytellers spoke the old words. And in those sounds, the soft syllables of Kich, Yucatec, and Itzá, the stars seemed to shimmer a little brighter. Meanwhile, technology brought new tools to the quest. LiDAR scans, satellite imaging, and digital modeling revealed entire lost cities beneath the canopy, vast networks of roads, fields, and temples stretching across hundreds of miles. The ancient world of the Maya was far larger, far more connected than anyone had imagined. Each discovery deepened the mystery, not ended it. The more we learned, the more the Maya seemed to expand beyond comprehension. They were not simply a people of the past, they were a mirror for humanity's search for meaning. And perhaps that is why the decoding of their script feels so profound. It is not just the recovery of words, but of worldview. Through their glyphs, we glimpse how they understood existence, as harmony between earth and sky, as dialogue between gods and humans, as an endless rhythm that even death could not silence. In a small museum in Guatemala City, a carved stela stands beneath soft light. Its glyphs, once unreadable, now whisper again. They speak of a ruler named Waxaclajun Abacawil, 18 Rabbit, the great king of Copan. His story ends in tragedy, captured by enemies and sacrificed. But the inscription does not mourn him. It celebrates his journey into the divine. To the Maya, death was not an ending, but a continuation, a return to the stars. And so, through the work of countless minds and hands, the stones began to speak. Today, when archaeologists trace their fingers across the carved walls of Palenque, they do not see symbols of mystery, they read sentences, names, prayers, poems. They hear laughter and mourning, politics and prophecy, human voices echoing across a millennium. This is what it means to decode time itself. The story of the Maya script is not just about decipherment, it is about resurrection. A culture silenced by conquest found its language again, not through violence, but through patience, curiosity, and respect. The circle closed. And somewhere deep in the jungle, where vines still curl over fallen temples, the stones sleep a little lighter. They know their words are no longer forgotten. When the rain falls on Tikal, the water traces the old glyphs, filling their grooves. It's as if the earth itself is rereading the story, page by page, drop by drop. Because time, like language, never truly dies. It only waits to be understood. Part 10, Collapse and Continuity, the Twilight of the Maya Kingdoms. The night fell slowly over the jungles of the Petén. The great temples of Tikal stood silent, their once brilliant facades fading under creeping vines. The sound of laughter, of drums, of prayers to the gods, all began to fade into the hum of cicadas and the whisper of wind. There was no single day when the Maya world fell. No great battle or divine punishment. Instead, it was like watching the sun sink below the horizon, inevitable, slow, and strangely beautiful. For centuries, the cities of the classic Maya, Palenque, Copan, Calakmul, Caracol, and dozens more, had stood as glittering jewels in the heart of Mesoamerica. They were centers of astronomy, art, trade, and theology. Kings rose and fell, dynasties flourished, wars were fought, and gods were honored. But by the 9th century, something began to change. The glyphs tell of kings who ruled for shorter spans, of ceremonies postponed, of temples left unfinished. The intricate carvings that once celebrated victories began to speak of drought, of famine, of silence. At first, no one noticed. The jungle grows quickly, and life always returns. But one by one, the great cities dimmed. Tikal, the heart of 1,000 years of power, became empty. Copan, once a city of scholars and sculptors, was abandoned, its royal line broken. Palenque, home of the mighty King Tikal, fell quiet beneath the trees. For generations, archaeologists asked the same question: what happened? Theories multiplied like vines around the ruins. Some said drought, and the evidence seemed to support it. Sediment cores and pollen samples revealed long dry spells, decades where rain failed and crops withered. The Maya had always depended on seasonal water, collecting it in vast reservoirs and underground cisterns. When the rains stopped, their cities, teeming with tens of thousands, faced starvation. Others pointed to war. The later centuries of Maya civilization saw an arms race of temples and blood. Cities competed for prestige, for trade, for the favor of the gods. Great alliances shattered into rivalries. Kings waged battles not for conquest, but for ritual captives, to feed the gods with human hearts. And beneath it all, the land itself began to collapse. Centuries of agriculture stripped the soil of its strength. Forests were burned to make way for maize fields. Erosion turned once fertile valleys into dust. It was a perfect storm, not one catastrophe, but many, converging in time. Inscriptions tell us of desperation. In one stela from Copan, a ruler performs a ceremony begging the rain god Chak for mercy. In another, a king disappears from record entirely, perhaps captured, perhaps overthrown, perhaps sacrificed in the hope that his death might bring balance. The divine kingship, the sacred order that had defined Maya society for millennia, began to crumble. People fled the cities, searching for food, for peace, for meaning. Some migrated north to the Yucatan Peninsula, where the cities of Uxmal, Mayapan, and Chichén Itzá would rise. Others simply vanished into the jungle, leaving behind empty palaces and half-built temples. And yet, this was not the end. For centuries, Western historians called it a collapse. But that word hides the truth. The Maya did not vanish. Their people lived on, in villages, in fields, in the rhythms of the land. The kings fell, yes, but the farmers remained. The potters, the weavers, the priests, they carried the flame forward, quietly. The jungle reclaimed the cities, but not the memory. In oral traditions and ceremonies, in the cycles of planting and harvest, the Maya spirit endured. And when the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, thousands of years after the first cities had risen, they found not ruins, but nations. Independent Maya polities still ruled parts of the Yucatan, the Petén, and the highlands of Guatemala. They had changed, adapted, survived. In the northern lowlands, Chichén Itzá had grown into a marvel, its massive pyramid of Kukulkan rising like a serpent from the stone. Here, Maya culture absorbed Toltec influence, creating something new, a fusion of myth and empire. The architecture became sharper, more geometric. The gods of war and sacrifice took center stage. At the equinox, the sun cast a shadow down the steps of the pyramid, creating the illusion of a serpent descending, Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, returning from the heavens. It was both astronomy and faith, precision and poetry. The Maya genius had simply transformed. Further west, at Uxmal, the pyramid of the magician stood tall, its curves unlike anything else in the ancient world. Legend said it was built overnight by a dwarf born from an egg, a reminder that even in hardship, imagination flourished. At Mayapan, the last great confederation of the Maya world, new political systems emerged. The divine kings were gone, instead, councils of nobles and merchants shared power. The empire was smaller, more fragile, but it showed resilience, proof that the Maya were never static, never defined by one golden age. The Spanish would later burn their cities, destroy their idols, and call them savages. But the truth, written in stone and in memory, cannot be erased. The Maya understood cycles better than any civilization before or since. They knew that the world turns, that even darkness is a part of the pattern. To them, collapse was not failure, it was transformation. When the droughts came, when the wars raged, when the gods seemed silent, they did what they had always done, they adapted. They moved, they rebuilt, they carried the calendar and the stories into new lands. The stars still guided them, and the maize still grew. Today, if you walk through the jungles of Guatemala, you might hear a rustle, a soft movement of wind through stone. Look closely, and you'll see how the trees have embraced the temples. Roots curl over stairways, vines hang from carved faces. Nature did not destroy these cities, it protected them. For 1,000 years, the forest kept the memory safe, waiting for the world to listen again. And when archaeologists returned centuries later, they didn't just find ruins, they found continuity. The same maize fields the Maya once tended still ripple in the wind. The same rituals, whispered under the moon, still honor the gods of rain and corn. The Maya world did not end. It became the world we see now. The people who sell fruit in the markets of Guatemala City, who weave cloth in the highlands, who speak Kitch, Yucatec, and Mam, they are the descendants of the builders of Tikal and Copan. Their calendars still mark sacred days, their festivals still mirror the old celestial rhythms. The collapse was never a fall into darkness. It was a shedding, a turning of the wheel. Because time, to the Maya, was never a straight line. It was a circle, infinite and patient. As the night deepens, the stars begin to pierce the sky, the same constellations that guided Maya priests through the centuries. The Milky Way, their world tree, stretches across the heavens once more. And if you listen closely, through the chorus of frogs and crickets, you can almost hear the heartbeat of an ancient world still pulsing beneath the soil, a rhythm that never stopped. The Maya may have stepped into shadow, but their story continues, not in ruins, but in the living world. Part 11, Under the Cross, The Encounter with Conquest. The dawn that rose over the jungles of Mesoamerica was not like any before it. It was quieter, too quiet. The soft cry of the howler monkey echoed over rivers that had once carried canoes of traders and pilgrims. The temples stood still, the jungle mist curling around their peaks like forgotten prayers. The Maya world had endured drought and famine, war and exile. But what was coming now was something it had never faced before, a storm from across the ocean. When the first Spanish sails appeared on the horizon in the early 1500s, the Maya did not yet know the meaning of the word empire as the Europeans understood it. They knew of gods who crossed the sky and kings who ruled by divine blood, but this was different. This was the arrival of a people who claimed to rule in the name of a god they did not know. They came bearing two things, the cross and the sword. And between them, they would change the world forever. The Maya had seen strangers before, traders from central Mexico, emissaries from the Toltec and Aztec worlds. But these newcomers were unlike any others. They wore metal that glinted like the sun, carried weapons that thundered, and rode beasts the Maya had never imagined. Some among the Maya thought they might be gods, but gods do not bleed. At first, there was curiosity. Maya merchants approached the newcomers cautiously, exchanging food and water for beads and trinkets. But it did not take long for the truth to reveal itself. These men were not travelers seeking friendship, but conquerors seeking gold, souls, and dominion. In 1511, a Spanish shipwreck off the Yucatan coast brought the first contact. A handful of survivors, including two men named Geronimo de Aguilar and Gonzalo Guerrero, washed ashore near the Maya lands. Aguilar was captured and enslaved, but Guerrero, a soldier, adapted. He learned the language, married a Maya woman, and tattooed his face. He became a warrior under a Maya lord, the first European to truly become part of the Maya world. When Hernán Cortés later arrived in Mexico and tried to reclaim Guerrero, the man refused. "I am married," he said, "and have children who go about as lords in this land. I am a soldier of the Maya now." Guerrero's story was a whisper of what could have been, coexistence, not conquest. But history chose a different path. By the time Cortés marched across the Yucatan in 1519, the world of the Maya was already fractured. The great city-states had long since fallen into rivalry. Unlike the Aztec Empire, centralized and strong, the Maya were scattered across dozens of independent polities. Each with its own king, its own gods, its own pride. And that division would cost them dearly. The Spaniards came in waves, not all at once, but in campaigns that stretched for nearly 2 centuries. They conquered not through might alone, but through patience and manipulation. They turned one city against another, exploited old feuds, and spread diseases that killed without mercy. The first major campaign began in the west, against the Quiche kingdom of the highlands. At Camarcaj, the capital, the Spaniards led by Pedro de Alvarado unleashed their fury. The Quiche, fierce warriors and descendants of the classic kings, fought bravely, but the thunder of cannons and the strange beasts of war broke their lines. When their leaders were captured, Alvarado burned them alive, a warning to all who resisted. One by one, the Maya kingdoms fell. The Itzá, the Caxcal, the Quequi, the Yucatec, all faced the same fate. Temples were torn down, idols smashed, sacred books burned. The Spaniards could not read the glyphs, but they feared them. To them, the intricate writing of the Maya was witchcraft, a challenge to their god. So they destroyed it all. In 1562, at Mani, the Franciscan friar Diego de Landa ordered one of the greatest cultural burnings in history. He gathered every Maya codex and idol he could find and set them aflame. He wrote later, "We found a large number of books, and as they contained nothing but superstitions and falsehoods of the devil, we burned them all. Only 4 of those sacred books survived." And yet, even as the flames consumed the past, the Maya found ways to keep their world alive. They adopted the new religion, outwardly. They built churches atop their old temples, renamed their gods as saints, and spoke prayers in both Latin and Quiche. But beneath the cross, they hid their truth. In the quiet of the night, deep in the mountains and jungles, the old rituals continued. The incense still rose to the heavens. The maize was still blessed in the name of the gods of rain and fertility. They wove the story of Christ into their own, not as conqueror, but as another figure in the endless cycle of death and rebirth. The Maya understood what the Spaniards did not, that belief was a living thing. It could change shape and survive even under the heaviest chains. The Spaniards saw submission. The Maya saw transformation. And so, while cities crumbled and empires fell, the spirit of the Maya endured. Even in the shadow of conquest, they continued to build. In remote villages, artisans carved crosses shaped like maize stalks. In their markets, women sold textiles woven with the same ancient symbols that once decorated royal robes. In their calendars, Christian saints quietly took the place of old gods, their feast days aligned with the sacred count of the Tzolk'in. The Spaniards believed they had erased a civilization. But in truth, they had only forced it to dream with its eyes open. The centuries that followed were cruel. The encomienda system turned the Maya into laborers on their own land. They built Spanish cities, tilled Spanish fields, and prayed to Spanish saints, but their hearts remained tied to the sacred mountains, the cenotes, the forest spirits that whispered through the ceiba trees. In their songs, they remembered the time before. A time when kings walked with gods, when the stars were a calendar, and the land itself was divine. That memory became their resistance. Even when rebellion flared, as it did countless times, the Maya fought not for empire or gold, but for balance. To restore the harmony that conquest had broken. And though centuries would pass, and though new empires would rise and fall over their land, the Maya continued to endure in silence, their story hidden beneath the ruins, waiting to be told once more. Part 12, Echoes of Rebellion, the Maya rise again. The jungle remembers. Even when the stones are silent, even when the temples lie buried beneath vines and roots, the air itself hums with memory. For the Maya, memory was never just recollection, it was power. It was how the dead spoke to the living, how the past guided the present. And though the conquistadors had crushed their cities and scattered their kings, they could never burn the soul of a people who had learned to dream beneath oppression. The years after conquest were years of darkness. The Maya who had once built vast cities now lived as peasants, bound to land they no longer owned. They worked from sunrise to dusk on Spanish estates, growing crops that no longer fed their children but filled the coffers of their masters. Their sacred language was forbidden in schools, their rituals condemned as heresy. Yet, deep in the villages, far from the eyes of priests and governors, the old songs endured. By day, they prayed to saints in stone churches. By night, they whispered to the gods of rain, maize, and death. The cross on the altar and the mask of Chak in the shadows, two worlds woven together, inseparable now. That was how the Maya survived, by bending, never breaking. For generations they endured, but patience has a limit, even in those who believe time itself moves in circles. The centuries of suffering built a quiet rage, a storm beneath still waters. And in the 19th century, that storm broke loose. The year was 1847. In the Yucatan Peninsula, the Maya people had lived for centuries under the control of Spanish-descended elites, hacendados who ruled vast plantations and treated the Maya as little more than slaves. Land was stolen, taxes were cruel, and debts passed from father to son. The Maya toiled in the fields of henequen, a plant whose fibers made rope for ships across the world, while their own children went hungry. But in the jungles and villages, leaders began to rise. Men like Jacinto Pat, Cecilio Chi, and Manuel Antonio I, men who had learned to fight with machete and musket, and whose faith was older than the Bible that had been forced upon them. They began to speak of freedom, not as a distant dream, but as a debt long overdue. The spark came in July 1847, when the colonial government discovered their plans. Manuel Antonio I was captured and executed. But his death did not end the movement, it ignited it. From the forests of eastern Yucatan, the Maya rose in revolt. Villages armed themselves. Church bells rang not for mass, but for war. The cry of rebellion spread like wildfire, Viva la Cruz Parlante! Long live the talking cross! The caste war of Yucatan had begun. It would become one of the longest and bloodiest indigenous uprisings in the history of the Americas, a war that would last over half a century. The rebels fought with a ferocity born of centuries of pain. They struck towns and plantations, driving out the landowners who had enslaved them. For a moment, it seemed as if the old world might return, a Maya world reborn from the ashes. They captured nearly the entire Yucatan Peninsula, forcing the colonial forces to retreat to a few coastal cities. But the rebellion was more than just war, it was also faith. In the forest near Chichén Santa Cruz, a vision was said to have appeared. A wooden cross began to speak, its words delivered through a prophet named Marcos Canal. It promised victory and justice. It became the symbol of hope, uniting the Maya people in a spiritual resistance unlike any other. They built a city around it, Chichén Santa Cruz, the capital of a new Maya state. It was both fortress and sanctuary, ruled not by Spanish law but by the will of the talking cross. From there, they governed their people, traded with foreign merchants, and held out against Mexico's armies for decades. For the world beyond, it was an anomaly, a ghost kingdom hidden in the jungle, defying empires. But for the Maya, it was proof that the old gods still listened. The war raged on. At times, the rebels nearly reclaimed all of Yucatan. But hunger and exhaustion began to take their toll. New diseases swept through the camps, and the Mexican government, now independent from Spain, struck back with brutal campaigns. The rebellion fractured, yet it never truly died. Even when the city of Chichén Santa Cruz finally fell in 1901, the spirit of defiance continued to burn quietly in the hearts of the survivors. It was never about power, it was about dignity. The Maya had learned that victory did not always mean conquest. Sometimes, survival was victory. Every song sung in kitsch, every festival held for maize, every story told beneath a starlit sky was a quiet act of rebellion. The caste war left scars that still run through Yucatan's history. Entire generations grew up with memories of blood and fire, of hope and loss. But it also left behind something else, a new identity. No longer just the subjects of kings or colonizers, the Maya emerged as something enduring and unbroken, bound not by empire, but by faith, memory, and land. When the guns finally fell silent, the jungle began to reclaim the ruins of Chichén Santa Cruz. The talking cross stopped speaking. But its message, of freedom and survival, still echoed through the forests, carried by the wind, whispered in the prayers of those who had lost everything yet refused to disappear. Even now, in the villages of Chiapas, Guatemala, and Belize, the Maya remember. They wear the same patterns their ancestors wove, recite the same prayers their great-grandparents whispered in secret, and watch the same constellations their astronomers once mapped on temple walls. The world may have changed around them, but their rhythm, the heartbeat of maize and moon, of time and soul, has not. For them, history is not a story of defeat. It is a story of endurance. Of a people who outlived the empires that tried to erase them. And in that endurance lies the quiet triumph, the conquest reversed, not by armies, but by the persistence of culture, language, and memory. Part 13, The Hidden Kingdoms, the Maya Who Never Fell. Deep in the green heart of Central America, where the air hums with the sound of insects and the canopy hides the sky, there are places where time itself seems to hesitate. It is in these jungles, thick with vines and memory, that the Maya never truly vanished. Long after their great cities had fallen silent, after the Spanish banners had claimed every coast, the highlands and rainforests still sheltered those who refused to kneel. They were farmers, hunters, priests, and warriors, people who slipped into the mountains and the deep forest, carrying with them the embers of a civilization that refused to die. Their kingdoms were small, often hidden, but they burned with the old spirit. The Spanish had called them rebels. The colonizers thought their conquest complete, yet entire nations still whispered in kitsch, keki, and Itzá, languages older than the empire that sought to erase them. To understand their story, one must leave behind the monuments and look into the mist, where the jungle swallowed empires whole. In the early 1500s, while Hernán Cortés and his conquistadors marched through Mexico, the Itzá Maya still ruled deep within the forests of Petén, in what is now northern Guatemala. Their capital, Tikal, sat upon an island in the middle of Lake Chichén Itzá, surrounded by water, guarded by jungle, and nearly impossible to reach. It was a city of survivors, a place where refugees from fallen kingdoms had gathered. There, the Maya built again. They worshipped the old gods, celebrated the sacred calendar, and watched the stars as their ancestors once had. While the rest of Mesoamerica fell under the shadow of crosses and cannons, Tikal endured, the last stronghold of free Maya rule. Spanish explorers had heard of the city for decades, but none could reach it. When they finally did, they were stunned. In the 1600s, over a century after the fall of Tenochtitlan, they found Tikal still thriving, with temples, pyramids, and a king named Conquest ruling over his people. He welcomed visitors cautiously, knowing what had happened elsewhere. The Spaniards, ever patient and persistent, tried diplomacy first. They brought friars who preached of salvation and priests who promised peace. But Conquest understood the pattern of conquest too well. He knew that behind the words of God came the fire of empire. For decades, the Itzá resisted. They refused conversion, refused tribute, refused submission. The jungle itself protected them, the roads impassable, the rivers unpredictable. The Spanish could conquer stone cities, but not this living fortress of roots and mist. Then came 1697. More than 150 years after the first Spanish invasion, the final assault began. The governor of Yucatan sent soldiers across Lake Chichén Itzá with cannons mounted on boats, floating fortresses of steel and fire. When the guns roared, the island shook. Temples burned, warriors fell, and Tikal, the last Maya kingdom, was taken. It was the end of the independent Maya polities. But it was not the end of the Maya. The survivors scattered into the jungle, taking their gods with them. They hid sacred idols beneath the roots of ceiba trees, buried codices under altars, and retreated into mountains where no Spaniard could follow. There, they lived in villages that outsiders would not find for centuries. The world might have thought the Maya gone, but their descendants still planted maize, still honored the days, still counted time by the sacred cycles. And as the centuries passed, the forest grew around their memory, guarding it. In the Guatemalan highlands, the Kich, Mam, and Canjabal people preserved traditions older than the church that ruled above them. They became farmers and weavers, but their rituals, disguised beneath Christian forms, kept the old ways alive. The smoke of incense still rose to the sky in the same rhythm as the ancient offerings to the gods of rain and maize. In Chiapas, in Belize, and along the rivers of Honduras, other Maya groups survived too, adapting, retreating, reappearing like shadows between worlds. They traded when they could, resisted when they must, and endured always. And there were stories, whispered stories, of villages deep in the forest where no priest or soldier had ever entered, where the Maya still lived as their ancestors had, untouched by time. Some explorers claimed to hear drums from unseen settlements. Others found glyphs carved freshly into stones, messages from a civilization that refused to be forgotten. The Spanish chroniclers, baffled by their resilience, often wrote of ghost cities. They called them ruins, but they were wrong. The Maya never saw their cities as dead, they saw them as sleeping. Every temple swallowed by roots was a living being, awaiting the next turn of the calendar. Every stone that fell into shadow would one day rise again in light. Even as empires rose and fell, Spain, Britain, Mexico, Guatemala, the Maya remained. Not as relics, but as people. They became part of the landscape, not conquered by it. By the time the world began to rediscover the ancient cities, when explorers stumbled upon Copan, Palenque, and Tikal, they found not just ruins, but living memory. The locals already knew these places. They had never forgotten them. To the villagers, those cities were not lost, they were sleeping ancestors, resting beneath the vines. The rediscovery of the Maya world in the 19th and early 20th centuries was, in truth, not a discovery at all, it was the world finally listening to voices it had long ignored. And those voices still spoke in the rhythm of drums, in the weaving of patterns, in the stories told by firelight. The Maya had survived by becoming invisible, and in that invisibility, they found freedom. When you walk through the jungles of Chichén today, you can still hear it, the murmur of water under stone, the hum of cicadas, the rustle of leaves where temples sleep. Some say it's just the wind. But if you listen long enough, you might hear something else. A whisper, ancient and patient, saying, "We are still here." And they are. From the mountains of Guatemala to the coasts of Belize, from the jungles of Chiapas to the plains of Yucatan, the Maya live, farming, praying, weaving, remembering. Their story never ended. It simply became quiet enough that the rest of the world stopped hearing it. But now, as their history is told once more, their silence breaks, not with war, not with conquest, but with the steady voice of survival. Part 14, The Rediscovery, When the Jungle Spoke Again. The jungle had waited for centuries. Vines crawled across ancient walls, roots wrapped around pillars once carved with gods and kings, and birds built nests atop what had once been altars of ceremony and power. For hundreds of years, the world forgot the Maya, or perhaps, the Maya simply chose to hide from it. But the earth remembers. And one day, the jungle began to whisper again. In the early 19th century, as the age of exploration and empire spread across the world, travelers, soldiers, and adventurers began to hear stories, rumors of lost cities deep in the forests of Central America. They came from local villagers, from merchants, from those who still knew where stone faces slept beneath the moss. These were not myths, they were memories. Whispers of cities older than the Spanish conquest, older even than the Aztecs. In 1839, two men, John Lloyd Stevens, an American writer and diplomat, and Frederick Catherwood, a British artist, stepped into the dense forests of what is now Honduras. They had come chasing those whispers. And what they found would change history. The air was heavy with heat and silence as they cut through vines, their guides leading them toward a mound overgrown with trees. And there, half buried in earth, stood Copan. A city carved from stone, its temples weathered but intact, its stairways covered in glyphs, words that no one alive could yet read. Faces stared from the jungle walls, kings, gods, jaguars, serpents. It was as though time itself had stopped, holding its breath. Stevens and Catherwood stood in awe. They realized, for the first time, that this was not the work of some forgotten colony of another civilization. This was the creation of a great people, the Maya. And though their empire had long vanished, their cities still spoke through every line of stone. Catherwood's drawings, precise, haunting, filled with quiet reverence, captured the world's imagination. When their book, Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas, and Yucatan, was published, it stunned Europe and America alike. Readers could not believe what they saw, entire cities swallowed by forest, their monuments carved with a precision rivaling Greece and Egypt. It was as if a ghost civilization had emerged from the mist. Soon, others followed. Explorers ventured into the jungles of Guatemala, Mexico, and Belize. They rediscovered Palenque, where walls gleamed white beneath the canopy, Uxmal, where pyramids rose like mirages from the green, and Tikal, where the tallest temples pierced the sky like stone spears. Each site told a story, of kings and astronomers, of wars and rituals, of a people who had once ruled the heavens. But the jungle was not eager to give up its secrets. It guarded them fiercely. Many explorers grew ill, some vanished entirely. Mosquitoes carried fever, snakes moved unseen through the ferns, and the heat was relentless. Every ruin had to be wrestled from the grip of roots and soil. And yet, the deeper they dug, the more they found, steely inscribed with glyphs, altars with offerings still sealed, skeletons adorned in jade. The question everyone asked was simple: who were these people? At first, the world misunderstood. They imagined the Maya as peaceful astronomers, priests watching the stars while the jungle grew around them. But as archaeology advanced, a more complex truth emerged, of dynasties and rivalries, of art and science intertwined with war and sacrifice. The Maya were not lost children of Atlantis, as some romantics claimed. They were a civilization entirely their own, born from this soil, shaped by its storms. By the late 19th century, the study of Maya civilization became a true science. Archaeologists mapped entire cities, catalogued artifacts, and began the monumental task of decoding their writing, the intricate hieroglyphic script that covered temples and monuments. At first, scholars dismissed it as decoration, not understanding its depth. But hidden in those symbols were voices. Every glyph was a word, every carving a record, of births, wars, alliances, and rituals. It would take nearly a century to decipher them. One of the greatest breakthroughs came in the 20th century, when linguists and epigraphers, many of them women, working quietly in the background, began to understand the phonetic structure of the script. Suddenly, the stone walls began to speak again. They told of kings like Chichén Itzá of Palenque, who ruled for nearly 70 years and was buried in a magnificent tomb beneath the temple of the inscriptions. They spoke of rival cities, Tikal and Calakmul, locked in centuries-long struggle. They told of astronomy so advanced that the Maya could predict eclipses and the movements of Venus with astonishing accuracy. And they revealed the humanity behind the stone: love, ambition, betrayal, and devotion. The rediscovery was more than archaeological. It was spiritual. For the descendants of the Maya, who still lived across Mesoamerica, this was a homecoming. Their ancestors were no longer ruins for tourists or curiosities in museums. They were alive again, their words reclaimed. The hieroglyphs that once lay silent were now being read by modern Maya scholars, the children of the civilization that wrote them. Yet, as the world marveled, a quiet question lingered in the air. What caused the fall of such a magnificent civilization? Why had the great cities been abandoned? Why had the jungle reclaimed them? For years, theories abounded: war, drought, rebellion, ecological collapse. But perhaps, in truth, there was no single fall. The Maya world did not end, it changed. The cities crumbled, but the people lived on, their culture evolving through time, language, and resistance. And in that sense, the rediscovery was not just a revelation of the past, it was a reminder of endurance. The Maya had outlasted empires, outlasted conquest, and outlasted the silence of centuries. Today, when you stand before the towering pyramids of Tikal or gaze at the carvings of Copan, you are not looking at ruins. You are standing in the middle of a conversation that never truly ended. The jungle may have hidden it, but the voice of the Maya never went away. It simply waited, patient, eternal, and proud, until someone was quiet enough to listen. Part 15, The Legacy of the Stars, the Maya in the Modern World. The story of the Maya did not end in ruins. It did not end in the jungle, nor in the crumbling temples where the gods once watched over their people. It continued, quietly, stubbornly, in the hearts and voices of those who still called this land home. For the Maya were never lost. Only the world forgot how to see them. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they found a people still bound to the rhythm of the sun, the rain, and the earth. Though their great cities had long since fallen silent, their traditions endured, in rituals whispered beneath the shade of ceiba trees, in the patterns of woven cloth, and in the stories told by firelight. The Maya had learned to survive, not by conquest, but by remembrance. The colonization of the Americas sought to erase them. Temples were burned, idols shattered, codices, the sacred books of bark paper, were thrown into flames. In a single night in 1562, Bishop Diego de Landa ordered the destruction of countless Maya manuscripts in Mani, Yucatan. He called them works of the devil. But what burned that night were not only words, they were centuries of science, history, and faith. Only 4 codices survived the fires. And yet, even as the flames consumed their libraries, the Maya spirit did not die. Their language persisted. Their ceremonies endured. Their gods simply put on new names, blending beneath the surface of imposed Christianity. The ceiba became the tree of life, the maize god became a saint. The sacred calendar continued to turn, its cycles observed in secret. The stars still spoke, if you knew how to listen. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell, borders were redrawn, and nations emerged upon lands where the Maya had once built their kingdoms. But in the villages of Guatemala, Belize, and southern Mexico, the Maya people endured, their faces, their speech, their knowledge echoing the ancestors who had mapped the heavens. By the 19th and 20th centuries, when the Western world rediscovered their ruins, many assumed the Maya were gone, vanished. Race, a ghost civilization swallowed by time. But that was a lie told by those who had never walked among them. The Maya were alive, cultivating the same soil, planting the same maize, honoring the same stars. Their civilization had changed form, from empire to endurance. The 20th century brought new light, and new wounds. Archaeology gave them back their history, but politics often stole their peace. Civil wars and foreign interests tore through Guatemala and neighboring lands, displacing thousands of Maya communities. Entire villages vanished in the violence, their voices silenced once again. But the people resisted, through art, through memory, through sheer survival. In the 21st century, a quiet revolution began. Maya scholars, linguists, and elders reclaimed their narrative. They read the glyphs that once only foreigners could interpret. They taught their children that the kings and astronomers carved in stone were not myths, but ancestors. The Maya tongue, once forbidden in schools, was spoken again in classrooms. Their calendar, the sacred Sokin, was celebrated as a living guide to time, not a prophecy of the world's end, as so many outsiders had misread it. For the Maya, time was never a straight line. It was a circle, endless, eternal, breathing. The past is not behind us. It is around us. Every sunrise is a rebirth, every ritual, a remembering. In December 2012, the world turned its eyes toward the Maya once again. Many feared the date carved into the long count calendar signaled the apocalypse. But the Maya elders smiled. It was not an ending, they said. It was renewal, the turning of a great cycle, a chance for humanity to begin again. The world misunderstood their wisdom once more. But in villages across Central America, ceremonies were held to welcome the new era, fire offerings, dances, prayers to the four directions. The stars had turned once again, as they always do. Today, the legacy of the Maya stretches far beyond archaeology and myth. Their mathematics and astronomy continue to inspire scholars around the world. Their architecture, the perfect symmetry of temples aligned to solstices, reminds us that art and science were once one and the same. Their philosophy, that all life is sacred, that time is alive, feels more urgent than ever in a world that has forgotten how to listen to nature. But their truest legacy lives not in stones or museums. It lives in people. In the hands of a weaver shaping the story of her lineage into cloth. In the rhythm of marimba music echoing through the mountains. In the laughter of children playing by the ruins of their ancestors. In the prayers that rise from fires at dawn, humble, fragrant, filled with ancient gratitude. To walk through a Maya village today is to step through centuries. You may see cell phones and concrete, but beneath them runs something older, a pulse that has never stopped. The maize still grows. The rain is still welcomed with offerings. The stars are still counted and named. In a way, the Maya never vanished because they were never gone. Their civilization simply changed its shape, from stone to spirit, from empire to echo. Their time continues, as the calendar turns and the world breathes in cycles. To them, every end is a beginning. And so it is with this story. As night falls over the jungles of Guatemala, the ruins of Tikal shimmer beneath the moonlight. Owls stir in the canopy. The wind moves softly through corridors where priests once walked. The temples glow pale and eternal, like the bones of a sleeping giant. And if you listen closely, you might still hear it, the heartbeat of a civilization that never truly died. The song of the maize, the whisper of the gods, the endless rhythm of stars. This is the legacy of the Maya. Not a memory, but a presence. Not an ending, but a return. For time, like the Maya, does not fade. It circles back, again and again, waiting for us to remember.